I've told bits and pieces of the story to people before, but I don't think I've ever shared the whole story in one piece. I also have to apologize for some of the details being a bit blurry to me. This is for two reasons. A. People may have lied to me about some of the circumstances, and B. Drugs were involved. For the record, I'm male, and at the time of the story I was 15 or 16. So when I was a lot younger, maybe 13, I got mixed up with a few of the wrong people, and we started experimenting with all kinds of drugs and doing all kinds of illegal things. This all culminated in one summer in junior high when I realized I was going down the wrong path, and so I got away from these people. Fast forward to my freshman year of high school, I got a random message on MySpace from one of the people I used to hang out with. This girl may have been the most screwed up out of all of them. I actually had a long history with her. We went all the way back to kindergarten. She liked to come up with names for herself that she thought made her sound edgy. At this time, she was going by Death Cake. Anyways, Death Cake told me that she wanted to catch up and that she had gotten herself together. Apparently, she just got out of rehab and was having a welcome home party. Being silly and young, I thought she really might have gotten it together, so I figured why not. It turned out that this party was really just me, her, and two other people. One of the other two people was a guy I'd never met before. He told me his real name, but also told me that he would like me to call him Snow. Alright, sure, I'll go with that. These people just like nicknames. Snow says he's 18 and spends most of the night making passes at me. I'm polite but clearly not interested. Everything in general is getting weird here, and I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable. I started getting my stuff together to leave when they begged me to stay a little bit longer. I figured fine. I guess the least I could do is celebrate her soberness with her. Then after that, I never have to hang out with them again. Now throughout the course of the night, I saw Snow pull Death Cake aside to talk to her privately. In the beginning, he wasn't really suspect, but a few times I noticed whenever he pulled her aside, sometimes he would look directly at me while he spoke with her. Death Cake brings out what she called herbal tea. Damn, I don't know how I could have been so young and stupid to drink that tea. That was the last thing I remember that night. The next day I wake up in my living room. I figured he must have had some drinks or something like old times. Got carried away. They dropped me off and I let myself in for another night of getting away with some illegal fun. The day after that, I started getting messages on AIM from somebody I never remembered talking to. He was very nice and kept referring to himself as my secret admirer. Mind you, at this point, I still really didn't remember anything from that night. So this dude keeps messaging me saying really nice things. I was actually kind of flattered. 3 or 4 days after that night at Death Cake's house, he tells me he has a present for me. He tells me to check my mail. 5 minutes later, I check. There in my inbox are 3 pictures of a naked dude. I realize I've seen his face before. I also realize I've seen his penis. It's Snow. Suddenly, details of the night at Death Cake's house start coming back to me. Then I freak out and realize exactly what must have happened. Now, before anybody judges me for not going to the authorities immediately, let me just say that I knew if I told anyone that all of the details of my past illegal doings would have also come up to the surface, and I wasn't about to let that happen. Instead, I figured that I would just never have to see this guy in any context again, so I kindly just told him to screw off and leave me alone. And just when you thought this was going to be a simple story, it gets much crazier. Snow. This dude left me alone for another few days, then I got a text message from a number I'd never seen. I love you, it said. And who the heck would send me that? I figured just leave it alone and don't reply. I love you, I love you, I love you, we have something special. All I can think at this point is no. Still, I'm hoping he will eventually wear himself out and forget about me. Now I have blocked his instant message account, so I got a shock when a new one starts messaging me. Except instead of words, it's numbers and pictures. 30, then a picture of a rope. 34, another rope. I'm sure you can imagine the bricks I shat when I realized he was quoting my pant size. Then all of a sudden something cracked in my head and I went full on berserk via instant message. I told him to leave me alone and that we would never be together, especially considering what he did. He told me if I wasn't going to cooperate, he would just have to lock me away so I could be his forever. This is when I finally threatened him with calling the police. I gave him a whole bunch of stuff about how I have a family in law enforcement. Not really true, but whatever, and if he ever tried to lay another finger on me, I would stop at nothing to see him rot away in prison for the rest of his life. Turns out this was surprisingly effective. I expected him to become more threatening, but instead he seemed more sad. Like genuinely sad. But obviously I wasn't going to try to help him. He started saying all of this crazy stuff, which I just ignored until he stopped. Once he did, he never contacted me again. I heard 3 days later from one of the people who was there that night that he ended up dead. A few months later, the same person told me that he almost died. This same source also told me that once he got out, he was coming for me. This is the part that I'd mentioned earlier, where I said I wasn't sure what to believe. This person who told me all of this was completely unreliable and a drug addict and had a history of terrorizing people in our high school, so who honestly knows what actually happened to Snow? I certainly don't. I haven't heard from him or about him from anyone since. These days, I'm a lot less terrified. I'm almost 22 now, and for the most part, my mental scars have been replaced with my ability to smell a creep a mile away, which has helped me help friends out of similar situations. So, there's that. Out of respect for everybody's privacy, names in this story will be changed. The important people to know are me and my cousin, whom I'll call Drew. Some of the prominent neighborhood kids we'll call Josh, Kylie, and Evan, and of course, Gabe. To set the story, this was around the time my mom and dad divorced. It wasn't a clean divorce, and there was a lot going on around this time. My mom had to move out of the school district and into a small home quickly, and my dad kept the house in our neighborhood. I bring this up to explain that although my two brothers decided to stay with my dad, I and my cousin, who lived with us most of his life, decided to move in with my mom. The issue was that my mom's new place wasn't within the school district, which meant no buses. So the setup was that she'd bring us to school before work, and after school we would catch the bus to my dad's house and stay there for a couple of hours until she got off work. Now that everything is explained, let's get into what you're really here for. There were quite a few kids in our neighborhood, and I guess you could say we all got along and hung out quite a bit. We would all ride the bus together, hang out after school, and heck, even try to build forts in the moss. The moss was a spot in the woods where you could access through a small opening at the end of a cul-de-sac. This is important for later. It was an everyday thing for us, until one day a new family had moved into the neighborhood, and with them was their son Gabe. He had brown hair and he was skinny. We first met Gabe on the school bus, and us being curious about a new kid in our neighborhood, we were all eager to talk to him. You'd probably think we got some vibe off of him, or maybe something about him was creepy, but honestly, he just seemed like a regular kid to me. He seemed to fit in with the other kids in the neighborhood. It became normal to see me, Josh, Kylie, Drew, Evan, and Gabe hanging out, rather than all of us or a combination of the few. After getting to know him, we learned that Gabe actually used to go to our school but got expelled after he threw stuff at a teacher, and only just that school year let him back into our school. Back then, we brushed it off as something edgy he did, but knowing the events now, it should have been the first red flag. You see, Gabe, Drew, and I became close. I'd argue closer than the other kids. I would have considered him a friend instead of just another neighborhood kid to hang out with, which is why we didn't immediately drop him off after the following events. I wasn't there for this, but I heard about it after the fact. Drew and I got on the bus one day, and immediately I noticed Gabe wasn't there. We sat next to each other every day on the bus. I just assumed that he was absent, and Drew decided to sit by me. Kylie and Evan, who sat near us, started talking about something that happened, and we joined into their conversation. Apparently, not long after Drew and I left to go into my mom's, Gabe had invited Kylie, Evan, and Josh to his house. Now, I don't remember what set this in motion or what really happened, but the hangout ended with Gabe chasing Josh home with a knife in his hands. Josh lived on the other side of the neighborhood, and once he got home, his mom came out to see what was going on, as she heard him yelling for her from the front yard. When she stepped out, Gabe chased both of them inside. The scariest part, they heard from Josh that he was laughing and had a smile on his face as he did so, like he enjoyed terrorizing them. The cops were called, and honestly, I don't know what came out of that other than Gabe was gone from school for a few days after. When he came back, he acted like it never happened. The kids in our neighborhood started growing apart from Gabe after that, especially John, whom I never actually saw talk to him again. I mean, who would blame him? I guess I felt bad for Gabe a little bit, but my stupid brain must have decided it was a bad prank that went too far or something like that. How dumb was I? I truly believe Gabe changed after that, like something had clicked in his brain. Not long after this, we were on the bus and I was talking to him as we sat in the same seats. All of a sudden, he just pulled out a pencil and tried to stab me with it. Not only did he try, but he also did stab me, right in the neck. Luckily, it only broke the skin, but it shocked me. He laughed like he was joking, and I decided to move seats. When I got off, I felt the need to explain what happened to the bus driver. I never should have done that. I believe to this day that one choice caused what happened next. He was kicked off the bus for a couple of days. When he returned, they made him sit at the front of the bus. He knew it was me who snitched on him. When I'd walk past him to get off the bus, he would glare at me and it felt evil. He called me names and a snitch, and I was honestly scared of him. Fast forward a week later, and all the kids in our neighborhood just decided that they wouldn't hang out with Gabe anymore, and I wish I could say the same. Even after everything I had just spilt to you all, I was not even dumb. Eventually, he messaged me apologizing and messaged me to ask if Drew and I wanted to hang out. I don't know why, but we agreed. I think I remember him saying that he and some other kids were going to hang out in the moss and build some forts, and I think that's why we agreed, because other kids would be there. So we set off to meet him at his house, which was just down the street from ours. We knocked on his door and he answered it, holding a knife. Screw the red flag. I was ignoring a whole red alarm at this point. It was a kitchen knife with some sort of orange handle. With a huge smile on his face, he held his arm up and just started swinging it all around. We should have just left right then and there. Why didn't we just leave? After a couple more agonizing seconds, he laughed like it was some sort of joke. It wasn't until now that I realized this kid was actually psychotic, like something was really wrong with him. He had a couple of tools with him and told us to follow him to the moss. For some reason, we did. I was holding out, hoping that he'd be normal when all the other kids would be there. We got to the small opening to the moss and walked in. To get to the small pond in the moss, you had to go down a slightly steep hill and through the brush, and you'd be there. I bet you could feel my surprise when I realized nobody else was there. I looked at Gabe, who just chuckled. They must be late. Let's just get started, he said to me. Both Drew and I were on edge, and I bet Gabe could feel it. Hey, go find some sticks and logs to build the fort, he told me. He pointed over towards the pond. I obeyed and made my way over to the area. About 10 or 15 seconds after I started walking, I just got the feeling to turn around, and I'll never stop thanking God for just doing that. Gabe was there creeping up on my cousin, who was picking up a large rock. He had a hoe-looking tool in his hand, raising it slowly. I shouted, "Hey," towards them. My cousin jolted up, and Gabe quickly lowered the hoe and looked at me in confusion. I ran up to them, telling them my mom messaged me and that it was time to go. This was a lie. My phone only worked on Wi-Fi at the time. I felt that Gabe knew that I saw him, so I grabbed my cousin, who didn't for a second question me, and we quickly started leaving. And at that moment, he chased us. We booked it through the woods for a solid half of a minute and got to the steep part, quickly climbing up it. I looked back and saw Gabe, with the face I could only describe as a psychopath, chasing us still. I prayed that we wouldn't slip or fall, and thankfully we didn't. Luckily, Gabe struggled a little bit, giving us time to bolt out the entrance. He ran halfway up the street and turned around. Gabe wasn't there. In fact, we never saw him leave. We went home, and the next day we told some of the other kids what happened. The weirdest part is, though, we never saw Gabe again, not on the bus or at school. Very shortly after, his parents moved from that house, and my dad moved out of that neighborhood a year later, with my mom finding a newer house in our school district. This was years ago. I recently looked Gabe up to see whatever happened to him, but nothing came up. No Facebook page or Instagram, nothing. It's like he just vanished. Like he never even existed in the first place. But I know he did. I don't live anywhere near there anymore, and I'm thankful for that. Gabe, I don't know where you are or what happened to you. I'm a female, and I was 16 years old when this began. My home life wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. I'd been dating a guy for about 9 months who was a nice guy, but our feelings towards one another just weren't mutual, so I ended it. My mom was very upset over this. Moving on, however, I met another boy in school named Leo that I thought was cute for a while. After some correspondence between friends, because that's how it was done back then, he asked me out and we began dating. The second my mom heard his last name, she gave me a hard time. He had a European last name, and she was not a fan of a specific nationality and their treatment of women. This was my mother, who was and is severely on the left and always loves to preach tolerance, so I was immediately put off by her attitude and told her so. Leo was a nice kid. He was nice to me and got good grades. I did not. I hated school and was always respectful to other people. We had a good time together. My mom really never even acknowledged him and always made fun of his nationality, which upset me to no end. Now, my mom and I had been having trouble for years, so this was nothing new. It seemed almost all of my choices and actions were met with disapproval, even if I weren't breaking any rules. The only thing I noticed about Leo was that he never brought me home or introduced me to his parents. I knew his brother, but that was about it. Then I realized he really didn't bring anyone around his house except for kids he was related to or who were the same nationality as him. I had grown up with a couple other kids of certain nationalities who behaved the same way, so I just accepted it and didn't really bring it up or think much about it. The trouble started as soon as he began bringing me around his cousins who didn't go to school with us. I began to realize why he kept me away. They were not like him at all. They were very loud, rough, and carried guns, often getting into fights. There were never really any other girls or women around, and he didn't bring me around much. It was usually just to pop in and say hello or drop something off or to pick them up. It was during one of these trips I met his cousin Gianni. I had gone to pick up Leo at Gianni's apartment, and Gianni was very drunk and loud, coming to my car. telling me how beautiful I was and giving me his entire pack of smokes when I asked for one. Because such a pretty girl shouldn't have to spend money on them, he said. Leo was also a bit drunk and happy to see me. He told me to just drive away because Gianni was obnoxious. About a week later, my girlfriends and I were going out, and it was Leo's birthday, the next day. His friends had gotten a room and had some beer and were going to have a get-together. My friends and I went out and planned to meet up with them later that evening. About halfway through the evening, Leo and I connected by phone, and he said they'd been kicked out of the hotel room. It was common where I live for kids to get to hotel rooms and get booted as soon as the staff saw they were bringing booze into the room and too many kids were coming in, so they were going to Gianni's, and it might be better to call off meeting up. It was fine with me. Fast forward to about 2 a.m., I was sleeping at my friend's house and her phone rang. We didn't have cell phones, but she had her own phone line in her room. Most of us did. She picked it up and it was Gianni, of all people. He asked for me. I can't remember the jumbled reason he had her number, but he asked me if Leo came to hook up with me. I said no, we decided to not get together this night. He proceeds to tell me that Leo left his place around 10 p.m. after opening one of Gianni's drawers and grabbing some condoms, saying that he'd need them. I'm going to point out that Leo and I had been sexually intimate, and we had a birth control and condom routine that we'll say didn't leave him needing to grab any from Gianni. Leo calls me the next day. I ask him what he ended up doing the night before, and he tells me that he just went to Gianni's and went home at around 1:30 a.m. We hang up, and I don't talk to him for the rest of the day. I'm thinking about what to do and say here. Monday morning arrives, and he is there to meet me for our first period class, which we had together. By that time, I had allowed myself to become angry and believe Gianni. He asked me what was wrong. I told him he was a liar and confronted him about the story discrepancy. And he told me Gianni was lying and to please not talk to Gianni anymore because he was a liar and was just trying to sleep with me. Gianni called me several times after that and convinced me there was a reason Leo didn't bring me around his family and that it was because he was just using me for sex and he thought of me as too slutty to bring around his parents. Looking back, I think I subconsciously allowed Gianni to manipulate me. I was having a lot of trouble at home with my mom, and on top of this, she was mean to Leo and constantly berated me for dating him. And I just wanted out of the house. Gianni had his own apartment. After a few more rounds of he said, she said, I broke up with Leo and began dating Gianni, who had let me run away and stay with him. His abusive nature quickly became evident. He began by telling me who to hang out with and who not to, hitting me when we argued, but I put up with it because, hey, it was better than being at home. I was with Gianni for a year. After a couple more months of being together, though, I had gone back home because my parents called the cops and threatened to have Gianni arrested for housing a minor. I was beaten and assaulted on many occasions during our relationship. He held guns to my head while locking me in the apartment, telling me I was going to die. I truly thought I was living my last moment several times. Finally, my senior year of high school, which I was barely getting through, I decided I was done. I broke up with him, and surprisingly, we stayed away from each other for 2 weeks with no drama. A nice boy had asked me to prom, and I was excited to go. Then I found out I was pregnant. I had become pregnant during a rage that resulted in Gianni assaulting me. It was our last encounter. He somehow knew. He called me out of the blue after 3 weeks and asked me if I got my period. I told him I hadn't. We went through a lot of drama with this, which ended in him beating me up and me having a miscarriage. Lots of horrible stuff. Somehow, in my memory, not as horrible as what followed. He blamed me for killing the baby because I had been the one to make him angry enough to beat me up. He started following me around town. I went to a doctor's appointment to talk to a therapist about everything that had happened, and when I came out, he was walking up the building. This was really my first encounter where I felt betrayal and rage. How did he know where I was? He hadn't followed me there. I had been on high alert watching for him. I ran back into the building and he followed me, telling me I'd better stop or he was going to cut my throat right there because he had nothing to lose. There happened to be a uniformed police officer walking out one of the offices. I asked the officer for help, told him Gianni would not let me leave and was threatening to kill me. The officer told me to leave and I did. I had to go pick something up from my grandma's house and then I headed home. As soon as I got home, Gianni was outside my house, talking to my dad. I drove by and didn't stop, they had both seen me. I drove about a mile up the road and headed back hoping he'd be gone. On my way back, he pulled up beside me and tried to run me off the road. I somehow got past him and made my way to the police station, where he pulled up on the sidewalk to try to block me from going in. This is now nuts. He was at the police station. I ran in and said I needed help. There was an officer outside who had stopped him, and he had the nerve to begin telling the officer that I had just aborted his baby without permission and he had a right to be angry at me. This event ended with me being told to go home, and I'm not sure what they told him. I do know he suffered no consequences. The following night, my friends and I were out for the evening, and when they pulled up to my house to drop me off, Gianni pulled up in his friend's car, their friend in the passenger seat. I didn't get out. My friend drove off in a hurry and began chasing us, 4 of us girls in the car. He repeatedly tried to run us off the road, and you could see his friend becoming angry and even a little bit scared, telling him to stop. Finally, again, the luck I had in this 2-day period, we see a cop who had someone pulled over on the side street. My friend pulled up behind the cop, who you can imagine looked angry and stressed out, as it could have been a threat. Gianni saw this and drove away. The officer followed us all home once he was done ticketing the driver of the car he had pulled over to make sure we got there safely. I ended up moving in with some relatives to try to hide from Gianni, but to no avail. Somehow he figured out where I was and started harassing my relatives and me just the same. He would call and leave long rambling messages on their answering machine about how I was going to pay and that they were all going to die just for helping me, that I wasn't worth it. He said horrible, explicit things about me that no relatives would want to hear about a teenage girl. I got several restraining orders and had to sit in the court next to him several times. The judge always granted the restraining orders because his behavior in court was so demonstrative. There were officers and other civilians who gave reports about him. For example, at one point during one of the hearings, the judge was addressing him, and suddenly, one walks up to the judge and says something. The judge demands that Gianni be arrested immediately and calls for a recess. I was so confused. Turns out he was standing with his hands behind his back and had been flipping me off. A lady sitting in front of me called one over and showed him. He was arrested repeatedly for breaking the restraining order. My mom had moved into a new rental house and I moved in with her. We hoped he wouldn't find the address, but he started calling. I couldn't figure out how he got the phone number. Well, during one of the many phone calls where I usually would just hang up on him, I asked him how he got the number. He said, "I have a lot of things," and he began naming things. One of them had been a bathing suit I had left at my dad's house to dry after washing it. It had disappeared and I couldn't figure out what happened to it. He had gotten into my dad's house and looked at the phone book and found our number and address. One night, I had come home again from being out. It'd been about 6 months at this point. My mom's house was a beach bungalow. It was the main house, and there were 2 smaller guest houses behind it that were rented out. I came home and wanted to see if one of the people I'd made friends with was home, so I went around back. I saw they weren't there, and I went into my mom's house through the back door. I had a very bad feeling though. About an hour later, I was lying in bed and I heard something next to my window. It sounded like metal hitting the concrete walk. I sort of listened and then froze. I got up and told my mom that I could hear something and that I thought we needed to call the cops, but she just got up and looked outside and was snotty about it and told me there was nobody there and to go back to bed. I ended up falling asleep and woke up a couple hours later. There was light that would shine into my window from streetlights behind the house. I had the shade down, but I could see the shadow of somebody's hand reaching up and feeling around the window, and it looked like they tried to push the top panel down to see if they could open it. I knew it was him. I got up again and told my mom, and she shooed me away again, getting angrier at me. She told me not to call the cops because it's embarrassing and how I had caused the family enough embarrassment with the situation. I finally go back to sleep somehow, and when I wake up in the morning, I keep hearing noise. I finally storm back into my mom's room and tell her someone is there, and I'm not kidding. She looks out the window and sees Gianni running away from the side of the house. We see him run down the street and get into an old car that I recognize as belonging to a girl I went to school with who was his cousin. He had borrowed her car to break the law. The cops came, and thankfully he had proven his presence with fingerprints and "I love you" written in the dirt with his finger on my windowsill. Back to jail with him. About a year later, I was working in a movie theater. I hadn't heard from Gianni in about 10 months. I liked working there and was quickly making friends with a lot of the young people that I worked with. It was fun as most of my high school friends had moved away to go to school. It was the first time in a while I had friends in a fun environment to be around. So I was working in the concession stand one night on a busy weekend night. It was after most of the primetime shows, the 7 to 8 p.m. ones had started. One of the managers comes up to tell me that I have a phone call on the payphone. This didn't seem right to me. I got a little tense because nobody that I know should know the number to that phone. Still, my cousins like to come to the theater a lot, so I hoped it was one of them who had maybe written down the number in case they wanted to get a hold of me during work. I walked over to the phone and it was Gianni. He says to me, "You look awfully cute in that uniform. I see you flirting with all those guys you work with. You're a slut." When people say things like, my heart sank into my stomach. I see what they're trying to describe. I felt sheer panic. I just held the phone to my ear and looked around the lobby, which was quite large, trying to figure out if I could see anyone or if I could see him. It was rare for people to have cell phones back then, but it felt like he could see me. I don't remember doing it, but at some point I hung up and just stood there for a moment, trying to gain my composure so I could go back behind the counter and work. About a minute after I got behind the counter, my manager, who had told me about the call, came over to get me and asked me to go outside. We walked out front and he introduced me to a guy named John who was dressed in plain clothes. I had seen the staff talking to him a lot, but I hadn't worked there long yet, so I didn't know him. He was an undercover security guard hired by the movie theater company. He saw my demeanor when my manager told me I had a call, then he watched me take the call and react to it. He said he knew something was wrong. Gianni didn't surface that night, and I didn't hear from him again for about 6 more months. He would pop up every now and again just to let me know he was there to make sure I didn't get too comfortable. It made me so angry for so long that somebody could just keep watching me and that I wouldn't know when they were doing it. I suffered with anxiety and paranoia for a long time because the reality of a situation like this is there is nothing anyone can really do. A restraining order doesn't keep somebody from stalking you, watching you, and snapping and choosing to kill you at any time. It has been 21 years and Gianni still pops up every couple of years, trying to send me messages on classmates. I ignore him and never engage. I now live 2,500 miles from where all this happened, and he lives several states away from me, but I know he could decide to come after me at any time, and there is nothing anybody could do. Leo unfortunately ended up becoming a product of his upbringing and environment. He was with some cousins and his brother one night driving in a car on a highway. He was in the back seat. A group of guys cut them off while driving, and his cousin chased them down in the car and shot and killed one of them. To finish this story, at one point while we were still together and I tried to break up with him, Gianni told me that he would kill my entire family. He said he would kill my grandma and talked about how he would get into her house and how easy it would be to break her neck. This made me sick and horrified for a long time. About 10 years later, my dad was telling me, completely unrelated, he didn't even bring up Gianni or relate the story to him, that my grandma had asked him for a gun because somebody had been trying to open her doors at night. They were jiggling the handles looking for an unlocked door, so he gave her a 12 gauge. She didn't want to load it, so he told her that when she heard somebody trying the doors, to turn on the lights and walk around the house cocking it. He said seeing somebody walk around cocking a 12 gauge should scare them off. This makes me sick to this day. I knew immediately and still know that it was Gianni trying to get into her house. Thankfully, I have learned from my fast teenhood and have wised up a ton when it comes to dealing with people, but the second you see a person manipulating you and trying to control your actions, telling you what to do and what not to do, walk away. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and your family. This is the first and hopefully the last time I'm writing here, so I apologize if it's difficult to listen to, but I just wanted to share with you, as I think this is the right place and at the same time get this case out of my head. Context: I'm a 26-year-old male. The incident occurred a week ago in Colin, where I was invited by my friend and business colleague. At 8 o'clock in the evening, I was on my way home and sat down at the bus stop to wait. I was alone there, except for a girl sitting on the other side of the bus stop. It was almost empty. At first, I didn't pay any attention to her and was busy texting my friends. However, several minutes passed and the bus still didn't arrive. During this time, I put my phone aside and that's when I began to notice some obvious oddities, to the point of feeling very uncomfortable. The girl looked to be about 30 years old, thin, dressed in a black dress and long black boots, with a hat lying next to her seat. What confused me a little was her unhealthily pale skin, especially on her face. It was probably just makeup or something, and her bags under her eyes were outlined in black. Nothing unusual. I've seen many people with informal styles and appearances, but her eyes were so empty, lifeless and glassy. However, what really scared me was the way she looked at me, with obvious aggression, predatory like a python looking at a mouse. At the same time, she smiled weirdly and disgustingly, sometimes licking her lips and quietly humming some melody. And this went on for more than 10 minutes, non-stop. Never in my life have I felt such confusion and discomfort as I did at that moment. I just wanted to run away, but at the same time I didn't want to look like an idiot, especially since I had waited so long. I understand how silly this sounds from the outside, but I simply cannot describe how repulsive and frightening she looked at me. Her face was so scary at that moment. I just knew that something was wrong, and my instincts and intuition were screaming that this was not normal, that this should not be happening. In addition to what I saw, I just felt in my gut that this would not lead to anything good. Eye contact was unrelenting. She was still looking at me and I was trying to look away, at my watch and or phone, and so on. I felt very uncomfortable, but I tried to be friendly, greeted her and waved awkwardly, but she continued to stare silently. Then the situation began to deteriorate rapidly, and her behavior became more hostile. From passive aggression, she moved on to more open aggression. She began to breathe heavily, grind her teeth and squeak. Then my patience snapped. I stood up and shouted at her, "Please stop." I kept my distance and didn't go near her because I realized that she was probably on drugs or had mental health issues. At that moment, she seemed to fall silent and spoke for the first time, muttering, "I'm sorry." At that moment, I felt a little bit calmer and she even stopped staring at me. I texted my friends that I was still out and be a bit late getting home, and just then my heart skipped a beat. She let out a loud cry like a scream. The girl jumped up from her seat and started coming towards me, muttering some weird stuff in German. I was confused and gradually step by step prepared to retreat, until the girl suddenly started chasing me and rushing towards me. This crazy clung to me with her long sharp nails drawing blood and tried to bite me several times, tearing my shirt at the shoulders. I had no choice but to hit her between the ears, as it was a matter of my safety, health, and possibly my life. After that, I pushed her aside and in a few minutes managed to run to a small shop where there were some people. I briefly told them what happened to me, and they told me to call 110, which I did. My scratches on my arm were successfully treated by a local worker, for which I am very grateful to him. Later, I went to the police station and showed them my injuries and scars on my arm. I told them about the incident, and they suggested that I file a report in order to bring the attacker to justice. However, I refused to do so because I was due to return to my homeland in 3 days and simply did not have time for all the red tape. I still don't know who this lunatic was or what motivated her, but here's my banal lesson. Never underestimate the number of crazy people around you, especially when it comes to big cities and if you are alone. I am a grown man and was able to stand up for myself, but imagine if a child or an elderly person had found themselves in the same situation. I'm afraid to imagine what would have happened next. This is not the worst or scariest thing that could happen in life, but it was so damn crazy and frighteningly absurd. This happened to me when I was 17. I was just about to graduate high school. I was homeschooled and very encouraged to pursue entrepreneurship. I was trying to establish a photography business that I could run after graduating. In order to build my portfolio, I decided to ask a few friends and acquaintances to model for me. I asked a girl I worked with if she and her husband would like to model a couples session for me. It could be a win-win, since they would receive free photos and I would get to add them to my website as sample work. We planned a day to meet, and I asked them to meet me at a local park one evening. Something you should know about this park is that it is pretty far out in the country. The park has soccer fields, baseball fields, a golf course, and walking trails, so it is on a large plot of land and fairly secluded. The only house in view of the park is the caretaker's home, directly across the street from the entrance. Unless there is an event or a weekend, there are usually not many people there. I felt pretty confident meeting the couple there because I was only planning to arrive about 15 minutes early to set up so I wouldn't be alone long. The park has an entrance where you can drive down a road into the parking lot to get all the sports fields, playground, and pond. The front of the park has a large grassy strip, which is where I was planning to set up for my photos. I bypassed the entrance and pulled into a little dirt section at the front of the park and began unloading all of my props. I was always taught to be a cautious person, especially as a young woman, so I took a quick glance to see if anybody was at the park. I saw one car in the parking lot and two guys tossing a ball in the baseball field, along with their pit bull. Across the street, I could see the caretaker out in her yard, so that made me feel a lot better. I decided I would just keep an eye out and continued setting up my stuff. I would glance up every now and then to make sure that the two men were still on the baseball field. I had no reason to believe that they would bother me, but something in my gut just told me to keep watching. The couple I was waiting on seemed to be running late, so I finished up my setup and glanced up to check on the two guys. To my horror, they were gone. The car was still there, but the men and the dog were nowhere in sight. There was a bit of a hill in front of me that blocked some of the park entrance from sight, so I thought maybe they had just decided to walk one of the nature trails. But again, that feeling in my gut just told me something was wrong. I looked at the caretaker's house and she had gone back inside. I couldn't get everything back to the car quickly, so I just grabbed my camera equipment and hopped in my car. I locked the doors, turned on the ignition, and got my phone out. Literally as soon as I got settled in my car, I saw the two guys coming over the hill with their dog. I feel my gut feeling melt into panic. You have to understand, there was no reason for them to come up to where I was. It's literally just an open grassy yard. If the dog needed to relieve himself, there was plenty of space for that at the wood's edge or the nature trail, or the walk to the pond, and all of which were way closer to them than where I was. They walked around my setup, and when they got to my car, one guy went around the front, and the one holding the dog on the leash circled my car. I assumed that they realized I had already noticed that they were coming, that I was no longer vulnerable because they rejoined and walked further up and around to the soccer field. Once I felt like I was no longer in danger, I glanced down at my phone to see that the couple I was supposed to meet had apparently forgotten about it and were at the beach. I was so fed up at that point I jumped out of the car, grabbed all of my stuff, and shoved them into the car. This was my first experience of how scary it can be to be a female out alone. I've had multiple experiences since, but this one sticks out to me the most because I'm absolutely certain that those guys intended to do me harm. And what kind of match would a 17-year-old girl be against two grown men in a pit bull? One thing is for certain, I will never go back to that park alone.